back to Funding Rural. I'm Erin Borla, trustee and executive director of the Roundhouse Foundation in Sisters, Oregon. The Roundhouse Foundation owns and operates a working ranch where we host an artist residency. It's been an incredible program that has brought makers and creatives from around the country to our rural community. Brad Kik was one of our first artist residents. He came to Pine Meadow Ranch in 2021 and then returned home to northern Michigan to continue running the nonprofit he and his wife Amanda founded there. It's called Crosshatch Center for Art and Ecology, where art meets earth. It's an organization that's supporting artists, writers, musicians, and also bringing together farmers who want to try new things and learn from one another. Crosshatch was a key partner behind a recently completed new building near downtown Traverse City. It serves as a performance center, a co-working space, and also provides some affordable housing for folks in the community. So Crosshatch has a pretty broad, out-of-the-box mission that sometimes even Brad struggles to sum up. But here goes.
We figured out we can shorthand this by saying we support the people who didn't listen to their guidance counselors. And we're all so lucky that they didn't. They're people who have this creative impulse, and it comes out in so many ways. And what we also discovered as we began really getting to meet all of the people doing this work is that they are often, not only are they artistic or creative in their approach to agriculture, but so many, especially these young and emerging first generation farmers, are often also artists of some kind, in the sense of they're potters or they're illustrators or writers, dancers. And Erin, if it's okay, I'll read this thing for you that I wrote
I'd love
100
that.
years ago. I decided I should write something about who we are and where we are and what we are, just so that I can introduce us to people. This is just, I would use it often when speaking. We did a lot of panels or presentations at other arts conferences, often talking about place and how arts institutions adapt to place or find their home, and how they build community without kind of requiring artists to do all that lifting for them. Okay, so it says, "This is our region. Chains of freshwater lakes and rivers, maple beach upland forests, whitetails and wetlands, warblers and jack pine stands, sandy soil and 6-month winters, the seasonal economy of summer cottages and planked whitefish, land protection organizations and blank slates on the Democratic side of the ticket, the rusted bones of the Detroit-driven manufacturing industry, the aging boomer retirement homes, the fast track from high school graduation to get out of Dodge, the rural conservatism and Confederate flags, the surprising tolerance for diversity, a progressive not quite city up the road with the killer foodie scene and way too much summer traffic, the big bridge to the real northern Michigan, where deep pride abides and the Yoopers remember the older traditions, the love of traditional arts, the waltzers, the distrust of government, the hunters and ministers and microbrews and drunks and old-timers who don't come out of the woods anymore, snowmobiles and jet skis, fat bike and cross-country ski trails, sailboats in the bay, watercolors of sailboats in the bay, the small farmers and large farmers and permaculture gurus, canoes and fly fishermen and both kinds of bikers, the film festival and trout festival and beer festival and bass festival and bluegrass festival and fiber festival, the super rich, but not the ultra rich, the community theater and improv groups and spoken word poets and amateur comedians and artisan timber framers and mandolin makers and letterpress printers and blues guitarists, a couple of pissed off old guy abstract expressionists, cherries and apples and CSAs, corns and cows and hay. The weather's always changing, so there's never nothing to say. 10 counties and a handful of major watersheds containing all this and much more."
That's a really beautiful piece. I love that. That just truly encapsulates who community is, right? It's all of these things. It's the yes and. It's the both kind of bikers. That's such a brilliant line. I think, the point of this podcast is to talk about philanthropy and how philanthropy can better impact rural spaces. And what we hear often in almost every episode is please go to these spaces and spend time. Break bread, have lunch, have coffee, buy a beer for somebody. That's how we get to know each other.
That was the top note on my notes, because Enjoying your podcast a ton. I haven't gotten through the whole series, but I've listened to like a dozen, and yes, it's the number one thing that comes out of every episode is one, you have to, for all the reasons you just said, go into this community, but also know that these communities have their own kind of cultural space. Uh, there's a lot of prejudice, a lot of like small p prejudice around just what we think about when we think about rural spaces. And then when you go in, it's the same kind of thing. When you actually go into a community, it's just has its own character. I actually wrote a piece to talk about because I was presenting on rural arts at a state conference a bunch of years ago. And when I was done, somebody raised their hand. They're like, look, I live in this place that's like, so east of 75, like Alpena, the sort of northeast lower Michigan, which is a very different kind of rural community, more like many of the people you interview, where it's farms and fields and hay, long stretches, big acres, fewer people. And so they were saying, I'm not sure that what you're saying here applies to us.
Mm.
And and so I realized that we need to be more specific about who we are, and we just coined this term tourist rural, which is to say that we are surrounded by fresh water, lots of lakes and rivers, pretty good efforts so far at resource management, keeping places beautiful. So we have a huge influx of tourists in the summer. We have a lot of second homes, and because of that, the kinds of people who stick around or who come temporarily are it's often a different feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, you have a new facility there in Traverse City. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is a pretty big, ambitious project for a little micropolitan like Traverse City. A couple of community folks here. One of them owned a coffee shop called Higher Grounds, still does. One of them was an attorney, really interested in co-ops. Decided to start and build a 4-story mixed-use building right on the central thruway, not quite downtown, but just a few blocks away from downtown. That's entirely community-owned. Developers were on board only as consultants, so it's a co-op made up of both tenant business partners and community members who all found a way to fund and build this thing. And at one point they said, well, let's have like a mixed use space, like a big room that we could use for conferences or whatever, and then also maybe have a show or two in there. And so they called up or emailed May Earlywine, who's one of our beloved local musicians and has done a whole lot of touring, and said, what would you look for in a music venue? And she was like, oh, I have a lot to say about that. But
I have an idea.
yeah, she really like put her heart into a kind of extended sort of manifesto about how music spaces serve or don't serve the artists and audiences that come there. And to their credit, the people who were behind this project listened to her and said, I think we can do that here. I think we've got that capacity. And then they said, would you run it for us? And May was like, no, no, that's not what I do. But she suggested they call us, which is still just a big honor that she thought of us as the local institution that really was most artist centered. And I think she trusted us with that vision. And we fell in love with it and had a huge fundraising lift that was incredibly challenging. Nobody wanted to be first. As soon as we got the first big gift, everything else fell into place within like 6 months. It was wild to see that work after 2 years of not getting much traction at all. And so we built this space on the second floor of this 4-story mixed-use building, and it's at its heart, it's a listening room, a performance space with 150 seats, and a 7-foot grand piano that was donated by the jazz legend Bob James, who also lives in this community, and came in and saw the place and sat down and just kind of sat there for a while listening to the room itself and just said, this is going to be something special, and then offered to donate this piano. And it's a place where we try not to be like overly draconic about it, but we ask people when they come in to just put their phones away and listen. And it doesn't mean you have to be quiet, it means you have to be engaged. And the artist might be asking for quiet. The artist might be asking for hoops and hollers, or having you jump up and waltz, or jump up and make a conga line. Like, I've seen all those things happen. But there's something, just talking with the team the other day, about if you come into this room and you see a show in here, there's just something extra that is so incredibly magical, that speaks right to the heart of what's so powerful about art, and really takes you right back to that campfire.
Mm.
And people are responding in an incredible way. And it's a huge honor and blessing to just get to be part of this scene. So the venue's called The Alluvion, and it's we're right on the river. Downstairs, there's an incredible restaurant. There's childcare in the building. I'm talking to you from a co-working space that's right outside the door of the Alluvion. There's a couple other nonprofits and a teaching kitchen and a cupping lab for the higher grounds coffee. And then the top 2 floors, there's a little bit of community meeting space, but mostly it's residential. It's like missing middle, so slightly subsidized for workforce housing, which, as you can guess, in a community like this that is so dependent on tourism, the service industry is huge, and housing prices are going a little bit too wild for people to feel like they can live here and work here, right? So this is like just the drop in the bucket to have 20 or so 1 or 2 bedroom apartments upstairs for folks.
That's awesome. And I got the chance to see it. It's such a beautiful facility and just an amazing space. So, for the purpose of this show, let's talk about your fundraising journey,
Yeah.
the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I will say that it was a hard sell in the beginning, when there was blueprints and business plans. And I don't know how many communities have the impact groups, Impact 100. I know that it's a worldwide thing, and Traverse City's got a very vibrant one. And the idea is that it's a women's philanthropy group. You buy your way in for $1,000 a year, and then you need at least 100 people, so that the smallest gift would be $100,000. And then you receive applications from community groups, and the women get to, they form committees and visit sites and go through interviews and then make recommendations. Then at the very end of the year, there's a dinner, and like 3 or 4 finalists present, and they vote in the room, and the winner gets the pot of money.
Yeah.
So by the time we had applied once, and we didn't make it to the finals, in part because they said, we really want this money to have an impact sooner. You haven't, I think at the time we might have had like steel beams. They're like, you're still a couple of years away from the space being ready, so come back. And we went to a couple of the other big funders in our area. And when I say big funders, I mean people who can give the very low 6 figures. So I'd say somewhere between like 50 and 150,000 is sort of a standard. We don't tend to have funders that go much above that. I'll also say that this community, and I think in part because of the sort of tourist rural, and because of the nature of this community, and I think communities like this, one is that there's a lot of nonprofits. There's like a lot of people with small and large, with really great passion projects. So there's a very crowded field of requests. And then what you see philanthropically is that a lot of the, like not the foundations, but just the families that might be the larger givers, many of them are seasonal, and many of them are giving to their university and the human interest sector. They're giving to that kind of thing downstate.
Yeah.
So a lot of folks who have the $1 million homes on the lake come to those homes and love to sit on the lake and maybe come out to eat, but aren't engaged in the nonprofit side of the community as much. So there's a lot of wealth here, but not as much of that wealth goes into philanthropy as you might expect in a different community. So that's sort of the challenge. So we went to who we knew. We got 3 or 4 no's, And we were like, oh, I think that's kind of what we have got
Yeah.
so far. And so that's when the financing came in. And it was actually like the building's called Common Grounds, or the institution that created the building is called Common Grounds. So they were able to find financing and then help pay for those places. But then we went back to Impact 100 when the room was not quite complete, but it was like a concrete box. And you could begin to really, this is the same time that when Bob James came in and sat down, like you could start to
Yeah.
feel what could happen here. And we worked really closely with May Earlywine, who is able to speak so passionately about that vision that she had. And we had just a stronger team, and we had a clearer articulation, and we went back and we made it to the finals. And May presented at the finals, and I don't think that we were meant to be one. In that at that time, there was 5 finalists, and Impact had grown to give three gifts of just over 100,000 each.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think we were really meant to be one of those top 3, but she gave such a powerful. I mean, she's a performer, and
Yeah.
she's a performer who just leads with her heart in her
Mm.
performances and in her music. And it just, yeah, it we won. And that was one of the things that she said that we had talked about in her presentation, is that because Impact 100 is made up of so many members of this community, that a yes from them is like a community vote.
Mm.
It's like saying the community they're speaking on behalf of the entire community when they say yes.
Yeah.
And so that was the trigger. That money was really important, but also the fact that we could put that logo everywhere and do the
Mm.
press releases that said, these guys said yes.
Yeah.
And right after that, the next foundation who had said no before said, wait, we've got something for you. And then
Yeah.
since then, now we can build that community network of all the people who come to shows. We can put them on a mailing list. We can do
Mhm.
some of the more traditional fundraising. We are now just about to launch sponsorship and fan club. And of course, a little bit from merch sales and all the other pieces that, ticket sales alone pretty
Yeah.
much just pay for the band that night. But so now we got through the big hoop, and now we're doing all the little pieces that keep the annual budget coming.
When I was first starting on the Twitter and the social media 100 years ago, feels like now, I had gone to a couple of conferences about like how do you engage and how do you build your social media platform. I by no means have a social media platform. I'll say I have not done it well. But the advice from the stage was, if you're going to get involved in social media, it's a conversation. And if you're unwilling to keep up your side of the conversation, don't start it. And I think that's so fascinating. And it sort of aligns with how we talk about funders as well. And we, here at Roundhouse really value the relationship. That's important to us. We want people to feel like they can call and say, hey, it just hit the fan over here. The food bank just burnt down. We have an application that we're starting with you, but now we need this other thing. Or, hey, I wanted to let you know that this went so well. I just think it's important that you hear how impactful that grant was, or your introduction, or I just wanted you to know what we're doing. Like, that is a big deal.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And realizing, I think it took, we're 20 years old, and I think it took 10 years before we realized like we knew there were people on the other side of that phone or the other side of that grant. We didn't
Yeah.
realize how much they really cared about connecting with us, and how I think the word grant writing, whether it's foundation or for a foundation or for a public grant, I think it's a misnomer that does a disservice, because people think, well, I'm a good writer, I can make the case, but it's really about getting on the phone and making that connection.
Yeah.
And we do part of our work here is during the pandemic, we did artist emergency funds. So
Mm.
very short application, $500 just out the door. If your livelihood as an artist has been impacted by the pandemic, then here's a little something to help you make rent or get your car fixed.
Yeah.
And then we do micro loans for farmers. So we work with a couple of the local food co-ops
Mm.
who have funded this bucket of money, about $10,000 a piece, that we can then loan out at 0% interest to farmers each year. And some of that, so we sort of have, in a micro way, this other side of seeing it. And
Yeah.
yes, there's this sort of like nice guy feeling where like people are like, look, I did all the steps, therefore I deserve this, versus, hey, I'm trying to build a relationship here, and I want you to, I want to prove to you that I'm someone who's trustworthy and really showing care. And so we've sort of seen the frustration from our side about like people who don't engage and build trust with us, and
Mhm.
it's really helped us too, as in our relationship with funders, to make sure that we're holding up our end of that. And I do just, I want to deliver this message, which is a critique. Often the funders can enter the room feeling like, convince me, versus how can I help, and sort of already knowing that they are one piece of many, and all of those pieces are important, right?
Mhm.
We have found funders who have approached that conversation, come in like really understanding that the people who are on the ground doing this work are incredibly good at what they do, and that they want to be a part of that. And it's such a difference between that conversation is so different versus the one that's like, well, I'm not sure that you are ready for my money, right? Instead of thinking about, this is all one problem that we are all working on together.
Yeah.
And if there's any message that I would want your audience to hear, it's just, obviously you want to take care. You don't want to just be there. There has to be some level of scrutiny and diligence, but also just being willing to engage the community in a way that says, I am one piece of this solution, one
Yeah.
piece of this process, and all of these pieces are important.
Yeah, it's the same sort of philosophy of like when you're going to visit a place. You don't go in going, well, I expect it to have a steakhouse that is 5 stars and a 4 diamond resort, and you have these, you right size your expectations, and you
Mhm.
go in with an open mind and curiosity to participate in the things that you're excited to learn about. And I think that's the way that our funder relationships should be. um, I'm reminded of a conversation you and I had recently regarding your residency program, and being in a rural place and talking about what happens when you're in the place that has like hunters and fishers. And
Mhm.
if you have visiting artists or visiting folks that are from the city, or from places that maybe don't have those things, and you had a sign up on the door.
We had told, so our artists in residence, we had a program called the Hill House that ran for 7 years, and we supported one artist at a time. Or occasionally you would come as a collaborative group, or you might bring a relational partner who's also an artist. But many of our artists were there in a log cabin in the woods, solo. And if you are used to that, if you're like a camper, if you're from a rural area, or you spend a lot of time in rural areas, that's comfortable. But if you're not, that can be pretty intimidating. And then if you're there in the around November, and also there's other times of the year, but particularly deer season, it's pretty alarming to wake up to gunfire. So we just made sure to explain to them that if they heard gunfire during this time, that it was people feeding their families and feeding their communities, and that, there's, Michigan now requires hunter safety classes. So accidental shootings have gone way down. Obviously, we're concerned about that, but we would also tell the residents, like, one, here's blaze orange. If you want to go out for a hike in the woods, you're going to want to wear blaze orange. You're probably not going to want to go out, just to be extra diligent. Don't go out at dusk or dawn. Like, wait for a brighter part of the day, and know that the most likely negative outcome of, if you're going to go out, is that you might disrupt somebody's hunting blind. They might get angry at you for walking through. I've never had as a hunter myself, I've never had a problem with that, because I always feel like people moving around out there are just moving the deer around too, and that means they're going to be more likely to come by me. But yeah, it really was this, like, especially if the sound of gunfire in your community often is followed by the sound of sirens, that this is a very different relationship to firearms.
Hmm. And different. sense of like people are feeding their family. I just think that's such a really dynamic moment of let's take a breath, and maybe we don't know everything that happens in this community and what that looks like and how we interact with each other, and it's an opportunity again to learn. Before
Yeah.
we close, I was wondering if you would read a section from your essay, the Beehive Plan. I think that
Yeah.
one was published at Front Porch Republic. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. And was written at a artist residency at Hambridge in North Georgia. Yeah. Yeah. And I'll jump right in. We, each of us, are capable of countless small acts of care, and in such is the restoration of the wild, the world, and the culture. In such is the conversion of the displacing colonist to the helpful, welcome guest. A single worker bee might live 6 or 8 weeks in the time of high forage. That bee will diligently spend the entirety of its life and work making about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey, which it will never live to eat. The fruit of its work outlives it and is passed along for the next generation to feed on. May I be so blessed to keep plugging away at my work in the world for another 40 years until all have made my 12th of a teaspoon.
Hmm.
The thing that really called out for me, and some of the things we've been talking about, is the importance of both institutional networks and community networks, whether it's hyper local or whether it's an organization like Crosshatch loves to find other organizations who think and work like we do, like Roundhouse and Pine Meadow Ranch, and have larger conversations about how our frameworks and methods and thoughts work across the country. This is another thing that you hear a lot from funders saying, it looks like you're doing this work that someone else is also doing similarly. How come you haven't worked together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of validity to that. Some of that is driven by a business sense of like economies of scale and wanting to be more efficient, but some of it's driven by just like, let's not have twice the staff doing the same work. So
Yeah.
it's a little, it's nuanced, but there's an important argument there. And I wanted to shout out Springboard for the Arts, which is
Mm-hmm.
based in Minnesota, and an arts organization that we have a huge organizational crush on, and who worked with a funder, got a pool of money, and then passed it around very generously to Midwestern arts organizations for the sole purpose of building and strengthening these kinds of networks. So sometimes you'll hear like, how come you're doing this? How come your work is overlapping with them? How come you guys aren't working together on this? And it may be that that's the first time we've heard of them, because both of us have limited staff capacity. We don't have a dedicated marketing person. We're working so hard on the programs that sometimes you just aren't finding each other yet, right? So what Springboard did is, one, they amplified the marketing aspect of it, and they helped us convene. And we were able to do it right here at the Alluvion. We had a 2-day session where we hosted arts organizations from all over the state, organizations that are interested in artist residencies, organizations that are what we call place-based. So anyone who really has land and is doing some kind of public-facing programming on it, whether that's a music festival or agro-tourism or a yoga retreat, whatever it is, as long as it kind of fits that very general criteria, we got money for that. And one of the beautiful things that they did that I have not seen a lot of from funders is they said, let's pay for the space, let's pay for food, let's pay for travel, let's pay for lodging. They just made it incredibly easy for what they knew were a whole lot of small, under-resourced, overcapacity organizations to make the time to come together. And actually, instead of saying, how come you're overlapping this work and not working together, they said, how can we use our resources to help you find and build relationships with people doing the same work? And the number of new collaborations and ideas that came out of that is going to be paying off for decades.
Yeah, let's gather and see, and then collectively, there you limit that duplication, right? It becomes this network rather than individual organizations siloing themselves. And I think in this time and place where we're all stretched so thin, to have a moment to have peers and mentors and colleagues all together to say, hey, I've been through that before. Don't put the training wheels on that way. Do it this way,
Hmm.
and it'll last
Yeah.
longer, or you'll be able to take them off sooner. Or this is how we found success building relationship and community. And I think that is so helpful. And we forget about that because we're so focused. And I say we, but the folks on the ground, especially, we got to feed the kids. We got to make sure that kids show up at school. We got to make sure that the houseless are taken care of, or whatever the mission of the organization is at the time. Um, it becomes so crisis oriented, and so
Hmm.
that's our singular focus, that we don't have time and space to say, but wait a minute, what if we did it this way? And I think that gift
Yeah.
of time is something that I think funders are really trying to look toward now. It's hard to build that space, but
It is. Yep. Lisa Funderburg Hoffman, who's at the Artist Communities Alliance, I'm not sure that she coined it, but she uses this phrase quite a bit, the tyranny of the moment. This
mm,
idea you are just stuck in this urgency. You're only focused on what's 3 feet ahead of you in the fog. And going back to very briefly, we spoke about we're doing this inside of these very large predicaments, things like climate change and a whole lot of oppressive social and cultural and economic systems, and then pollution and species extinction. The planet is like really feeling
yeah.
the weight of us. And when we gather and when we have that kind of space, not only are we building networks, but it does allow us to sort of take that larger step back and look at some of these bigger pictures and say, wait a second, we can do this in a way that's actually going to cut climate emissions, or we can do it in a way that's going to speak to this other problem. And it's like Wendell Berry talks about, and Gary Snyder also beautifully talks about the way that cultures need to become as complex as the ecosystems they inhabit.
Hmm.
And one of the ways that we as institutions can support that is by having that time for conversation, and of course great art making is a big part of that too, to complexify things. A lot of times when you hear like, oh man, don't complexify this because we're already over capacity, that just makes it sound like everything's going to get harder. But
Yeah.
really what it is things get more interesting and more nuanced, and you have now more people at the table to sort of share all of this. And I think when we talk about organizations like overlapping, it's less about like now you have two more people to work on the same thing, but it's actually more like, no, now you get to work on this in these slightly different ways and in communication, where now your response is more nuanced than it to
Mhm.
match the nuance of the problem. There's just so much beauty that comes from that ability, and it's not something that we tend to focus on. So there's a lot of room to grow in that way.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm so excited that our paths have crossed in so many unique ways, and just really appreciate all the things that you're doing. So thank you for being here today, sharing your story, sharing the work that you're doing, and looking forward to our paths crossing again.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for the invitation to come talk. Really enjoyed it.
I think I could listen to Brad's poetry and writings all day. I love the way that he shared his description of his community, how it is so many things. And I think if you ask any rural person that truly loves their place, what their place means and who they are, it's so deep and complex. The bikers and bikers and the number of festivals and the vibrancy of that community really comes through in his work, and that truly you can hear in his heart is who his community is and where that place is, how much it means to him and means to everyone in that space. I also love that he talked about conveners and foundations providing resources to convene nonprofits to talk about the work that they're doing. I think oftentimes, even here at Roundhouse, we hear from different partners in different parts of the state that are doing different work. and they haven't worked with other folks that are doing that similar project in another part of the state or even just down the road. And so the opportunity to connect those folks and build relationship, and then also providing resources to pull people together and have a chance to meet collectively, really helps that nonprofit ecosystem to be stronger. It aligns certain partners to do certain things. It helps really give vision to what systemic issue they're all trying to solve. I don't know if we see that as much in the arts as we could, and how urban and rural arts programming could really learn from one another and lean on each other, creating those third spaces, places like performance halls and gathering places. So whether you're from an urban place visiting a rural place, or whether you're from a rural place going to an urban place to see a show, how do you better support the arts in that community to be thriving in those places to support that community? Check out fundingrural.com for more resources, information about Crosshatch, and even some of Brad's writing. Thanks for listening.